But it's a great story, Abraham, and we owe our relationship to you because you reached out to him. And I just pray as we go through this next couple of weeks, you just make this story alive to us in new ways. In your son's name, amen. Amen. Alrighty, so we're going to go through essentially two Toledotes today, but mostly our focus is going to be on what became of Terah, which is the entire story of Abraham. And so we will squeeze in just a little bit here, the Toledot of Shem, what happened to him, and then explore our first patriarch. So again, the Toledot of Shem, this section is basically designed to trace the ancestry of Abraham, the son of Terah, back to Noah, who of course was traced all the way back to Adam. So God is committed to us even though we are not committed to him, and certainly haven't been through the first 11 chapters of this book, right? Now, Noah's oracle is still true because the blessing is going to come through Shem. So remember, there's a blessing and a curse among the sons of Noah. And Shem got the blessing, and not surprisingly, he ends up being one of the people. Here you go. You get a piece of paper. Is your hubby coming?
No.
After that, you can fold the other one into an airplane. Okay. Or choose whatever group you like. You get two choices. All right. So Noah's oracle is certainly going to come true from this perspective. Now, the fun thing about this is obviously set up in a generational pattern. There are 10 generations from Adam to Noah. There are 10 generations from Shem to Abraham. So again, we're left with this idea, we should be left with this conclusion that at the end of the day, God has designed your birth to be in a place and a part of history, right? It's not a random accident in any way, shape, or form. And so, again, we're not just made in his image, but we're specifically designed, as Ephesians 2:10 would sit there and say, to work the works that he has prepared beforehand for us to do. And he's not kidding about that. Because again, he's gone off and he gives us some specific things to get accomplished. And that's enough of Terah. So, enough of Shem. All right, so we're getting really into the narrative part of the book. So we've been treating the whole thing as literature. The whole thing certainly is. We've looked at narrative parts, but we're really going to spend some depth now taking a look at some of these different things. And this book here, How to Read the Bible as Literature, I got in the early 1990s. And my copy is well read, falling apart, and then bunnies had chewed on it. So it looks like a mess, right? But this book is an excellent book because, again, it just refreshes in your mind things that you should be thinking about as you look at the narrative parts of the Bible. And, of course, most of the Bible is, in fact, narrative, I think. So we're going to look at Abraham as our in-depth way of looking at these literary rules. So, of course, a well-told story, everything works to produce a unified impact. This is what I think is missing most of the time when we look at Abraham's story. We're not going to spend a lot of time going verse by verse through chapter 12 through 25 for the obvious reason. You've heard 100 sermons on Abraham over your years, right? And most of the time, those sermons focus on 2, 3, 4 verses at a time, and what we miss is the big picture. We're going to focus on the big picture, and that's what narrative rules help us to understand, right? And again, these are very simple rules of storytelling that we should be ready to apply as the occasion arises. This is the second book of mine that's fallen apart and rabbit chewed, The Art of Biblical Narrative by Robert Alter. Alter is not a Christian. He's a Jewish writer. He's won a lot of awards for his work in Jewish writings. His translation of the Old Testament is like one of my favorite ones, just to go back and say, hey, how does a Jew take a look at this? And so, excellent book, but again, you have to understand his worldview. He has this great quote that I think is really important for us not to ever forget. We learn through fiction because we encounter in it the translucent images the writer has cunningly projected out into an intuitively grasped fund of experience, not dissimilar to our own, only shaped, defined, ordered, probed in ways we never manage in the muddled and diffuse transactions of our own lives. Is that not a wonderful phrase? What the heck does he mean? Right? What he's saying is the reason why we're reading about somebody from what, 3,400, 3,500 years ago. What possible intersections could we have with somebody from 3,500 years ago? And what he's sitting there saying is that, again, basically it's intuitively grasped because the experiences that he has are not dissimilar to our own. The problem is, especially in our age, we live at such a frenetic pace that we never have a chance to stop and think about our own narrative, much less anybody else's. And so this is when we read through this, we should be feeling this, right? Biblical narratives are supposed to be effective. It's not a story of what happened, it's what happens. And as soon as we connect to what is happening in it, we find that it is happening in our lives as well, right? We're supposed to inevitably respond to this. And at the very least, as the characters and the action and the settings and all these things play out, we should be left with, I'm either sympathetic or I have an aversion to what has occurred here. At the very least, we should be able to sit there and say that part of the story hit us in that way. And so this is, again, a great book, much more dense than Reichen's book, but again, absolutely worth the read. So, when we go off and we take a look at this, we're going to look at a handful of rules as we go through this. Readers and interpreters of biblical stories would do much better with all of these stories than they often do if they just follow the simple rule. Pay attention to what happens to the protagonist in the story. So, who is the protagonist in this Toledo? Abraham. Right? It's all about Abraham. He's the one character who's more or less in this entire thing. There's basically one big exception. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. But even there, he's put his finger on the scales, if that makes sense, right? And so, again, if the story is built around the protagonist, it's helpful to then view the story as someone who undertakes an experiment in living. Does that make sense? Abraham is basically working his way through a scenario that he doesn't fully understand and grasp. Does that sound familiar to anybody in this room? We forget that because we know what? We read the end, right? We understand that it all works out well for Abraham, right? And we all sang the little kid song when like we did a couple weeks in church, right? We all understand everything turns out great for Abraham. However, for him, it was just an experiment. And he is being tested, and he is falling forward and he's falling backwards at various bits in time. Probably just, again, like a lot of us in this room, right? So the idea of outcome is really important for us. The outcome of that experiment is implied by its adequacy or inadequacies that are detailed in the story and the narrative. And so if we look at that, then I think that draws it back to us today. We're going to look at one of the major themes. We're going to put 4 themes I want us to take a look at, 4 plot lines, but one of them actually utterly applies to us today. So outcome is going to be something we want to focus on. That's going to be your quiz today, as it were. So there's a handful of other rules I want us to go off and take a look at this, right? One of these things is that we don't often lay out the unifying pattern or patterns of the story. We miss the big picture, right? We get stuck in, what does this word mean? How do you interpret this verse? Blah, blah, blah. And we spend all the time looking at the puzzle piece, and we never understand where it fits in the puzzle, and we never once look at the box top. And when you do that, you miss the bigger things. And I think one of the things I hope we're going to see in this next couple weeks is, again, the intersection of these plot lines and how, again, they help us to inform how we should react and where Abraham failed in his experiment or where he succeeded. Again, 3 basic principles. All stories are built on unity, coherence, and emphasis. And so again, we also want to look at things that drive the unity of this, the coherence, and then finally the emphasis almost always comes in the details. So I think one of the big things about this is to understand that sometimes narratives have a single plot line, right? I'm going to pick on Samson, right? Samson is a very classic plot line. It's kind of this first one here. It's the heroic epic, if that makes sense, right? Samson is presented as a hero of the Judges period, but he has these ups and down cycles and things like this. And of course, how does it end for him? That's the heroic epic journey. That's a very, very common. It's still used today in TV shows, to books, to comics, whatever. It's so common we don't even think about it. But this is actually one of the first things that we've got to deal with in Abraham's life, because there will be moments in time through his episodes where it is about the heroic epic journey. And how is he doing with that, right? But that's not the only one in Abraham's life. Because one of the other things we see is that God doesn't just lay it all out for him. He sits there and says, hey, I'm going to do this for you. And Abraham's like, well, that's great. And then things happen. And then God says, well, I need to lay out some more stuff for you. And then you are way off field, buddy. So I need to lay out some more stuff for you, right? It becomes this progressive revelation of the covenant with God, which of course relates to us, because do we know everything?
We don't want to know everything.
I'll argue with you, yes, we don't want to know everything, right? Because I'll probably go run out from and play on, Preston until I get killed, right? But the idea is to sit there and say that is very true for us. We can see not just in our own lives, but as we look backward toward Abraham, everything has been a series of what? Progressive revelation. There's a quest for a son and descendants, and that has a lot to do with this book. And then finally, there is this struggle between faith and expediency. This goes back to one of our main themes of the entire book of Genesis. That again, we see people who move in expediency or move in faith. And oftentimes, this is presented to us in the form of a test motif. There's another literary function. And again, it's essentially the writer or the author of the story puts the character into a moment where they're tested. And this test motif then reveals the character as we look at the consequences of the outcomes and things like this. So this, in particular, is what we're going to spend our time today looking at. So again, the prominence of testing and choice. This is a Leland Ryken quote. Prominence of testing and choice in the stories of the Bible is a corresponding rule for reading and discussing them. Identify the exact nature of the tests that the protagonists undergo, or the choices they make, observing how the story is structured around these tests and choices, noting how leading themes of the story are related to the testing and the choice. And this is the thing that we're going to focus on today, because again, we find these people at the crossroads of some sort, right? And then you go through the antecedents, the actual occurrence, the consequences, these threefold components of it. And finally, it's almost always whatever the test is about is what the story is about. So identifying the test, understanding it, helps us to really narrow in on what the writer's talking about. Okay, so and that's what we're saying here. So test motif, whenever it's present, that's the good framework for organizing the story. So again, it's worth looking for these things. So again, you get to practice that today. And of course, it's usually the meaning of the story. So I've done some work for you. You guys all have a piece of paper in front of you. It's not page 1, 2, 3, 4. You are group 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have a set of highlighted scriptures. And so what I've done is I've taken the story of Abraham and I've broken it into its episodes. And these are the various episodes, parts of it. Some episodes fit nicely into chapters. Others get broken up in different ways. And so what we're going to go off and do is we're going to basically take these plot lines, and I'll go back up here for a second, right there. We're going to look at these 4 plot lines, and we're going to basically say, is this plot line in one of these episodes, yes or no? Because and we're looking to see where do these things land. And what I'm hoping to find is what? That there are certain episodes that include what? All 4, because that tells you what? That may be the denouement, right, of the whole thing. The whole story is moving in this direction or something like this, right? But of course, it's interesting because if this is where the test is happening, then do these things fall out or vice versa? This is what we're going to be looking for the next couple of days. So, getting past that again, that's the first set. This is the second set of them. And again, this is, Sodom and Gomorrah will be the one part where Abraham's not really part of it. Otherwise, everything's got Abraham in it from this point forward. Yes, we've already done the betrothal of Isaac. Sorry about that. It would have been a lot of fun to do it after this, but we'll touch on it again when we get there. Now, we've talked about the fact that this is a big picture exercise. So let's start with a few big pictures, right? Abraham is called out of Ur of the Chaldees. And this is the biggest map I could find, so you can see actually the words. You should be able to read them in the back, right, Steve?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Love it. Great. So he comes out of Ur of the Chaldees. Now, if you look in your own Bible, its own map, it may have some alternate locations for even Haran or how to get to Haran. But to me, I like this map because basically he does what? His family follows the Euphrates, basically up to the headwaters, right? That's an obvious way to go. Because wandering out here in the desert doesn't really do you a whole lot of good, right? Not much out there. I think one of the other things that's fun about this map is there are so many place names that were from Genesis chapter 10. Can you pick out a few of them? What's some of the obvious, what's like first big place that stops on the map?
Babylon.
Babylon, right? Exactly, right? Then you've got, up north of it, you've got what? Nineveh, right? These other places, right, are way up there, okay? Nippur, it comes in here. Who ends up living in Susa?
Esther.
And? Daniel. Exactly right, okay? So these things will come back into our stories again and again and again, right? Damascus was not called Damascus, but whatever. You know, again, I love, we've already talked about the idea with the Nephilim of anachronisms using place names that we're familiar with. Aleppo, one of the oldest copies of the Old Testament was found in Aleppo, and then one of the oldest copies of the New Testament found in Aleppo as well. So that's an interesting place. Anyway, so then he comes down, he hangs out in this area. Shechem actually hangs out a little bit, you know, a little south of that in Hebron, goes over, comes back to Beersheba. He'll travel up and down this side from that point forward. So that's the big picture of his movement. Some notes in my thing here on this. One of the things that's interesting, we get this as extra biblical in the sense of it's extra Genesis. Where does God call Abraham? Does he call him in Haran or does he call him in Ur? When you read the book of Genesis, where is he called from? Haran.
No, it's either Haran, he doesn't go to Ur.
In Acts 2, he's called in Acts 7 verse 2, he's called out of Ur of the Chaldees. He's called again out of Haran in Genesis.
After his dad dies.
After his dad dies.
Yeah.
It's a both and. But it's interesting. There's no indication that in Genesis that he was actually called out of the Ur of Chaldees. We get that from Acts and Stephen's number. Okay, one more big picture. This is a really big picture.
Okay, nice.
I love this picture. This is a really great picture. I worked with this picture to try and blow it up and to crop on it, and you just could not make that sucker work. What? So, and you can't read any of the details. You can see that's obviously, you know, Hagar and Ishmael, right?
Obviously.
Can we figure out who the guy with the 10 camels and the betrothed people are? Isaac, right at the end of the story.
Yeah, I see 3 too. Yeah.
Exactly right.
That's kind of what I was thinking. That Joseph and Mary, there's the wise men.
There's the tamarisk. You guys, you didn't recognize the tamarisk tree? Oh my God, you guys are useless. I gotta get a beer class, right? Okay, the part that I loved about this is you see what? This journey, yes, a river, call it a river. I love it. It's that journey, right? This is what we're looking for. We're looking for the things that are difficult to see unless you look at the entire big picture and the things that are pulling all this stuff together. So, with this up here, let's explain what I have in front of you and the time that we have remaining. I want you to find your other fellow 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. But look at your piece of paper before you get up and start monkeying around. Let's put like 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. If that makes sense. 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. So again, stepping back into the pre-Toledotes, the part what became a Shem. This is kind of again the flow of the story that starts there, right? You get a lot of this stuff about Abraham's. Everybody's a cousin in this whole deal, so it is what it is. I would insert a joke about Louisiana was where I was going to go. Since the chairman of the board is Louisiana, but anyway, is what it is. All right, so again, we'll walk through this a little bit of this flow and stuff like this, right? So again, God calls Abraham, tells him to move to Canaan. Abraham is already 75 years old, childless, but a beautiful wife who's not his cousin per se. He obviously moves to the oaks of Mamre, Shechem, right? God appears to Abraham, promises to give him the land of Canaan to his offspring, and the result is that he goes off, builds an altar, moves into the hill country of Bethel. This is essentially this first one, the calling and the promise. So group 1, is this an extra? Was there a test motif in here? Is it about faith versus expediency? What was the results?
Faith.
The exercise of faith, right? Mm-hmm. What's the test? Is it a test motif?
Would he move that far away?
It is a test motif. He says, go and do this, right? Because we have a test motif in a guy named Jonah. He says, go and do this. And what does Jonah do? Jonah goes in the opposite direction, right? Okay? So it's subtle, but this is definitely a test motif as well, right? So we have then, he pitches his tent between Bethel and Ai, builds an altar. As a result, Abraham, Sarah, and Lot go on to Egypt, right? So this is the next one on the idea of the famine, chapter 12. If we're looking at this is the, and again, this would be 10 through 20, verse 10 through 20. Again, faith versus expediency. Is this a test of what's going on here? So it is a faith versus expediency. He acts on expediency. What's the test? Is there a test motif in it?
His wife. Does he have is that his wife or his sister?
Yeah, that's the test, right? Yeah. The famine is not the test.
Right.
Okay? That's the interesting part about this, right? Because again, there will be a famine that drives this storyline from Abraham all the way to the end of the book. Okay? There will be a famine that drives these storylines, right? The famine is not the test. The test is what? His beautiful wife. Right? And does he pass or fail?
Fail.
It's a failure, right? So again, keeping our big picture plots and stuff like this in mind, there is up in the Bethel Ai area, and then of course they wander on down into Egypt at that period of time, right? So of course, bringing up the rest of this, again, God it comes after Pharaoh. Pharaoh's like, what in the wide world of sports are you doing to me? And he forces him to leave with what?
Hagar.
Booty. Yeah, he leaves with a bunch of stuff, including somebody who we will find out later on is one of the next plot twists of this whole deal, right? So now they move on back to Bethel. Of course, it's not called Bethel at that time. So all these sort of anachronisms that go through here, right? Then again, Abraham calls upon the name of the Lord. So there's a separation between him and Lot. Talk to me about that. Is that a test? What's the test? Is it faith and expedience?
Faith.
Faith?
Expediency.
Or expediency. Okay. So group one, what did you guys take?
We said faith.
Faith, why?
Well, because Lot chose based on how it looked, and Abraham said, I'll take whichever you don't choose.
Right.
So he had faith that God was going to still bless him, because God had promised to bless him.
God had promised to bless
So he took whatever.
Yeah, he takes the leftovers, right?
Leftovers.
And how does that work out for him?
Very well.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
didn't get stuck with Sodom and Gomorrah.
Now again, Sodom and Gomorrah, we don't know where that is. All right, but from the description of this, you get this sense, and again, it's in the Jordan Valley, right? And there's this idea that it's kind of up in this area somewhere, probably maybe on the other side of the Jordan, right? And that this would be where Lot ends up, and then leaving this more, what we would traditionally, anybody who's been to Israel knows this sort of as a Judean wilderness, right? It is not, you're not farming there, let's just put it like that, right? It's very much more about being a shepherd than anything else. So this gets you the sense that he takes the lesser, and then what you get with Lot is he's going to take the more verdant components of it. All right, so God promises, we go through this, right? Then we got this down here at the, so he says he's going to give him. This nice thing is you get this right after this, and then down here in 14, which then brings us into the last of this for group one. Obviously, what happened, I'm just going to bring this up first. We have this weird combination of stories. We have like 4 kings versus 5 kings, right? And one of the kings with the coolest names of all of the cool names, Kedorlaomer, right? You just want to name your dog that. Anyway,
I don't think so.
you don't think so?
Too many souls.
A lot of syllables,
I
right?
thought his name was, in my mind, Cheddar Lomer, so.
His nickname is Cheddar.
It's kind of a cheesy name.
King Cheddar.
She set us up.
Yeah.
What are you doing with that, right? What can you do with that? So his boys come on down, and they do what? They went right down through this area and wipe these people out, and then they're heading on back, right? And of course, Abraham, goes after them and starts, chasing after them. So in this case, chapter 14, how did you guys land on this? Is a faith expediency?
You said it's faith.
You said, I hear both in faith.
Faith.
It's faith. Okay, so let's talk through it. What's the test?
Save the nephew.
Is he going to be able to save the nephew? Who puts that test before him? This is the test Is this one of God? Is this a God test?
The king of Sodom,
Yeah.
or he wants
The
to
messenger came and said, they're gonna say, or, this is happening, he's been kidnapped or whatever,
Yeah.
ransomed.
Okay. So Abraham can do what at that time?
He can choose to go and rescue him or not.
He can, exactly right. Okay. So rescuing him is an exercise in faith or expediency?
It's an exercise, probably both, but certainly faith.
Okay. Well, I think there's some faith, but the faith is he believes what? He's got a couple hundred trained men.
Yeah.
He
Right.
thinks he can go off and take care of
Right.
this, right? So I know your group went off and looked at all the other plot lines. I think at that moment in time, this is the epic hero journey,
Okay.
more than it is faith and expediency. Where's the faith and expediency coming in?
maybe not taking the gold.
Yes,
from King
that's
Sodom.
that's exactly it. The faith and expediency part of this is what? He wins, he comes back, and now he has the opportunity to do what? Get rich. He's rich, he's wealthy, right? And the king of Sodom is basically saying to him what? I can enrich you. Abraham's response to that is what? Don't need it.
Yeah.
Thank you very little, right? So the faith expediency test is not the action of going off and chasing after Lot. That's a different plot line. The faith expediency component comes at the end, the result. The setup is at the end, now that you've won, what you're going to do with your ill-gotten booty, right? So from that perspective, all right, good. So that was how did group one do, guys?
Good?
Good.
Sure.
All
All
right.
right.
Teacher said B.
Not so enthusiastic. You did win the crowd
Thank you
over.
very much.
Yeah, see? Defend yourselves, right? Come on.
We were overachievers.
Yeah. Explain.
We also determined which of these other things,
probably
like
were
was
supposed
it
to do all of them.
chronological, was it a quest for son, progressive revelation? We did all the things.
Yeah, so even though I said 3 or 4 times, I just need to.
And we were still done early.
They were down there so I could
If
remind
only
Scott.
you used that time to check your answers.
We did, and we were still right.
So perfect. I love it. I love it.
Even after harassment from the teacher.
Well, yeah, so she goes up and she goes, well, I teach. This is what I do. And I'm like, I carry the stick.
Good.
Exactly. So this is a whole different approach. All right. Now, moving on. Group number 2. Here we are, number 15. Or chapter 15, right? So we get into this next section down here, right? God gives a covenant ceremony to Abraham. And chapter 15, is that a faith expediency plot?
All four.
It's all four.
All 4, okay? So let's start with why is it progressive revelation? Let's start you off with the easy one.
Because God called Abram in chapter 12.
Uh-huh.
And so this is a deepening, a progression in that calling where not only does he promise a seed, but now he promises the land.
Yeah.
Abram asked questions. How will I know? I'm very old. You know, he asked questions about both. But then God says, here's how you're going to know. And then he cuts covenant unilaterally with Abram, who just stands there and receives it by faith.
Okay.
God also prophesies what will happen in the future to his descendants. He gives him a prequel of this future story, and then says, and your descendants will come back and defeat all the ites in the land.
Ites, exactly. You can wipe out the ites. Exactly. Now, from this perspective, then I'm going to ask you the 2 more difficult questions. How is this part of the shaping of his heroic epic? Is it because he knows where his journey is going to end?
I think you have to believe the oracle or not of God.
Okay.
And so, will you let the word of God, the promise of God, shape your life? I think is the biggest heroic question. Can you see around the corner in faith or not?
Yes, exactly right. Because again, God. So the reason I ask it the question that way is because we all know we are in this room. If you're believers in Christ, you're going to end up where?
Heaven. With
The
God.
kingdom, stupid. We did that. Right?
I'm teaching.
Yeah. Why I'm never making teacher of the year, right? Heaven's a temporary place, people. We're ending up in the kingdom, right? So, but the idea is to sit there and say that, but again, do we live like that?
Of course.
That's the heroic epic. That's the heroic epic. Right? So I will grant that's part of it. So let me tell you, how much faith does it have to be unconscious? Right? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, but if you back up in verse 6, it says, Abraham believed the Lord after you just told him about all his offspring.
There you
He
go.
said, and he believed and he credited it to him as
Righteousness, that's
So
right.
he wasn't just when he was
Which is an
unconscious.
interesting
Yes.
narrative device, because we don't have any sense that he's acting in faith until what happens?
Sacrifices also.
The narrator
Tells us.
interprets the events.
Yeah, he tells you.
Because normally in a story you get what? It's the characters who are revealing the actions and the motivations, right? Their dialogue tells us something, right? We're not getting dialogue from God, and we're not getting dialogue from Abraham. But the narrator, Moses, does what? Here's what's going on. You may miss this. Boom. I'm going to drop this in there for you. Perfect. Well done, Scott. All right. Number 16 then. Moving on to Ishmael. Is this a faith expediency?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's just that I get my point in there immediately. So I mean, it's the whole thing of, hey, you promised a son, and then Sarah's like, I'm not getting any younger, so
Yeah.
here, try this.
So I think I'll make everything worse.
Does he make everything worse?
Yeah.
No, it's just there's a disaster because this is going to
We
be this
live
is
with
going
it today.
to be
We
sand
talked
in the
about
gears forever, right?
Frank said just go look in the newspaper.
Right.
Well, if
exactly.
you find a newspaper, maybe online.
Yeah, exactly. But the point of this is, from Sarah's perspective, how is she responding? Faith or expediency on Sarah's part? Right? She has no faith. She's not exercising any faith, but she's exercising what she can control. Do any of us sit there and say, hey, I can control this?
All the time.
All the time, right? That's why I love Wayne makes this phrase. He sits there and says, high capacity people, right? These are Abraham and Sarah, high capacity people. And they do what? They act in that capacity a lot of time. And the results end up being this, which in this case.
Well, we get a promise from God and then we try to enact it ourselves.
Right.
And we're like, well, I'm just following. And God didn't say that the baby was going to come through Hagar. Like the progression of the revelation is next time when God says, hey, it's through Sarah.
That's right. Exactly right. Which then leads us on to him basically doing what? 17, circumcising everybody, right? So for you guys, 17, exercise faith, expediency.
All for them.
All right, great. Let's walk through all four. You overachieving people. How is it the heroic epic journey? And if you sit there and say it's heroic for a 98-year-old dude to circumcise himself,
It is.
then
It listed specifically his age.
that's exactly
I
right.
think he believes
But it
God
talks-
and wants the mark of
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
And not only that, when you're talking about the heroic epic, he again lays out what this is going to mean for the future generations, that this is the covenant. So you are getting a view of the whole story again.
Great. So let me weave this in an odd sort of a way here, right? Why I think this is the heroic epic journey is because it is in fact the mark, right? How do we know who the good guy is in a Western? What mark does he
White
bear?
badge.
No, he bears a badge.
Oh.
That's his mark, right? You're talking
Unless you're a
costume.
man with no name and then you wear a black hat.
And they wear a black hat, right? So, but the idea is to sit there and say there are, if you look through these various quests, there become these identifying elements or items, or a person who has a mark on them in some way, shape, or form, that again does what? Distinguishes them in some way, shape, or form. So it's an interesting idea there. Okay, keeping on with that then, obviously the progressive revelation of God, that's too easy, we're not going to deal with that one. The quest for the son, descendants, in chapter 17. You said all four.
Yeah.
God corrects Abraham.
Stop giving them the answers.
She was on the campaign.
She was
the
the
leader.
Oh, she wasn't here. You give the answers.
We elected her. Yeah.
You elected her.
Parliamentary
Unanimous.
procedure.
It was
yeah.
unanimous.
Yeah, we railroaded her, but
You poor thing.
Okay.
Isn't 17 where he says, Abraham talks to him and says, "Hey, but what about Ishmael?" And he says, "Well, I've heard your plea about Ishmael, and I have decided to bless him, and I will make him a great nation. But it's through Sarah this time next year
Yeah, exactly.
that you're going
15,
to
16 is where it goes into.
that you're going to have Isaac."
Yeah, so it's in that area too. And again, the other implied part of it is what? The fact that he sits there and says, "This is for you and your descendants." Right now he has descendant. You know, so he's got one. All right, good. So that's it for group number 2. How'd they do?
Good.
Boy,
We did great.
there you go. I'm like, if you can't love yourself, then you're always going to, right? Number 3. We're out of time. You guys are killing me. Well, anyway, this is the exercise. We're gonna stop right here, because we're gonna pick this back up. All right. You should keep your little sheets of paper. You can change to another number if you want to, but keep your little sheets of paper, all right? Because we're not going to break up into groups. Yeah, what?
2 angles visit Sodom.
I didn't write this. This is just, it is what it is, right? I mean, where she sits there and
Angles.
It says angles twice.
Awesome.
I can't write on the bottom.
It's copied wrong, okay, but it's right here. Okay, so just
Angles.
hang on here just a second.
So you're taking a new angle.
Seems a little off there.
Oh, there's what I was waiting for.
I was trying to work isosceles in there, but it's a lot harder.
All right, there we go. So anyway, we're gonna go like this, and then basically here. Is that better?
Much
All
worse.
right, much worse.
Thank you for
For just a second, so your homework is to continue to go through this exercise. Because what we're going to do when we get back, which we're now going to look at, because I want you to fill in, if you haven't already, group 1, is to fill in the other 3 plot lines and to go through these things and to ask the kind of questions I'm asking. To sit there and say, okay, if you sit there and say it's part of the heroic epic journey, then be able to sit there and say, defend it. Why is it? Is it just a quest for the sun? Again, what is it? How does it work? Because now what we're going to look for is those intersections of those plot lines, and then to see how they transition from episode to episode to episode, and to see how those plot lines are picked up or left behind to be picked up again later. Because the whole point of the next time we get together is to look at this story in its totality.
In 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks. Well, yeah, something like that. Whenever we
Exactly.
exactly like that.
Yeah.
I just know when I'm here on Sunday, I have to teach. So that's how that's going to roll. So, but show up more often, I'd be here more. There's more teaching, right? Exactly. Anyway, let's close. Father, thank you for the story. Thank you for the discussion. And again, Lord, help us as we look at the story of Abraham in its big picture form. Make it more alive for us. Make it more exciting for us. And then again, help us to see ourselves in it. Because we're the protagonist of our story, and you are working in our lives in these same ways. You've called us to a heroic journey ourselves, right? Where you've asked us to be more than we are in ourselves and who we were before you met us. You've given us great promises. And you keep coming back to us when we fail and when we succeed, just like with Abraham. And for us too, we are looking for a promise to be fulfilled. And Lord, just make that promise real. As we see it was real for Abraham, it will be real for us. In your son's name, amen.
Amen.